All right, let's talk about Israel. Because there was a big vote on it today, and I saw your reporting on it, and I wanted to speak to you about on it. And before we get into particulars, you had alluded to this view a couple answers ago, where you basically said like Israel was a big problem for what is tearing the party apart. And there's an adjacent view to that believes that one of the reasons Biden struggled and then Kamala lost was because they stayed so steadfast in their 100% support for what Israel was doing in Gaza, providing weapons, providing arms, refusing to even say they would condition those arms, that they didn't even give anything to the base of the party, the young people, Muslims in key states, that indicated that they even cared at all. And, if you had told me even 5 years ago that a major presidential election would be decided on foreign policy and specifically Israel, I would have, thought you were crazy, though I would have been very happy to have learned that. I'm wondering, do you think that was a big issue in the 2024 election, the fact that there was such a lack of enthusiasm or even anger and apathy on the part of voters that the Democrats crucially need because of Biden and Kamala's steadfast support for Israel?
Yeah, in a couple of ways. One of them is that Trump has latched onto this better than any Democrat has. There's frustration in America with the aftermath of the Iraq War and the idea that America has let its children die for people in other countries, spent money on it, spent lives on it, ruined lives over it, and gotten nothing for it. And Trump has been consistent in all his three races for president in opposing that. I think he got more effective as the candidate after that first term, and the voter who might have thought Trump is going to let nukes off because he'll get angry, I think Hillary said he'd be baited by a tweet. Once that didn't happen, that was more credible. That's part of it. I think the second part, when it comes to Israel in particular, by bowing this up with Ukraine, frankly, it looked like Joe Biden, the defender of the status quo in foreign policy, the restorer of that after Donald Trump left office, the guy who was rebuilding our alliances, that he was getting rolled, and both Vladimir Putin was pursuing his war against Ukraine while Biden was building that alliance, but also he kept trying to negotiate with Netanyahu and getting nothing for it. Now, has Trump done better with Netanyahu? He hasn't, but his approach has been more antagonistic, more like a partner. The Biden approach was very weak, and voters who were not dreaming and thinking of Israel every single day and making that their top issue, they looked at Biden and said, what do you get from this style of foreign policy? Imagine the voter here. I'm tired of hearing about this war. I'm tired of spending money on it. I'm tired of looking at images of people being blown up by bombs I paid for. What's his plan? It looks like he's getting rolled, whereas Trump is getting gifts in office from Netanyahu. Now, if you want the war over, that's not much better. You're not getting the result. But Biden looked much weaker. But that first part of it, I think, is important, that just Democrats becoming the party that was defending elements of this Bush era status quo, that was accepting endorsements from people like Liz Cheney. They were not saying elect us and we're going to start a bunch of regime change wars, but it looked like they couldn't end them. And that was almost as bad for voters.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. All right, so you have, and we're going to show the polls, but I don't need to. I know you know them, and but viewers know them as well. We've gone over them before, where you see in pretty much every demographic group in the United States, with the exception of old conservatives, like people who have been watching Sean Hannity for 30 years. But other than old conservatives, every demographic group in the country is on a steep decline in terms of their support and approval for Israel. It's especially true for young Democratic voters, and including young Jewish Democratic voters who now overwhelmingly have an extremely unfavorable view of Israel, don't want the United States funding and arming this country, particularly while this genocide is ongoing, and even afterward, I think it's going to permanently change how Israel is seen and talked about in the political discourse. So you have this massive change in the base of the Democratic Party voter and in voters generally. Even conservatives under 50 have a majority of them now see Israel disfavorably, and yet you have almost zero movement, like imperceptible movement, on the part of the actual office holders in the Democratic Party and its leaders in terms of how they speak about Israel. A few, being willing to do some, I guess, symbolic things, even like Adam Smith, who's, the congressman for Boeing, a big supporter of Israel, came out today and said maybe we should condition some. So there are some symbolic things finally now, but for the most part, there's this huge gap between what's going on in terms of political perceptions about Israel and Gaza on the one hand, and what the Democratic Party and its elected leaders are doing and saying on the other. And I guess part of what happened today was an attempt to bridge that through some resolutions that would have staked out a formal position of the Democratic Party with respect to Israel, arms that we send, money we send, and Gaza. Tell us what happened with those.
Yeah, the breakdown of what was happening today was that Ken Martin, the chair of the party, had a resolution that recommitted Democrats to a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza, but did not make many specific points. It was restating, I would say, the Kamala Harris position, but a little bit tougher in saying that Democrats want to bring this war to the end. They want a two-state solution. There was another resolution introduced by a young DNC member from Florida that it was much briefer and more direct, and it just said, we commit the party to supporting an arms embargo. We urge our Democrats in Congress to support a Palestinian state. Now, what happened in the meeting over the resolutions is that the Ken Martin resolution passed easily, almost no debate about it. The second resolution, there was an attempt to amend it and say, well, we're for an arms embargo on offensive weapons, so not everything.
To weaken it.
That didn't succeed. The amendment was defeated.
There was an attempt to weaken it.
To weaken it.
Yeah.
Yes, and that didn't succeed. So the members of this committee, the resolution committee, voted against that. Then the entire resolution was voted down. There was a debate over it, which James Zogby, one of the former DNC member, pointed out to me. That was the first time there's been an open debate about Israel in the DNC meeting since 1988. And when he was part of that debate in 1988, he was briefly kicked out of the party, or kicked out of the official party. And so that happens. It's over. Ken Martin walks across the room to this Florida DNC member, has a conversation. The press can watch but not hear it. And what they end up deciding is that Ken Martin is going to retract the resolution that passed. There's going to be no official Democratic position. He's going to create a task force, membership deadline TBD, and that task force is going to work towards the party's position on Israel. Now, that sounds like a dodge. It is a dodge. It's punting the issue to later. I did, from the people who wanted that resolution, I heard both, wanted the second tougher resolution. I heard both, this is a way for the party to dodge this so that nobody can bring this up at the open meeting tomorrow where the press is going to be too, or Chris Murphy's actually going to be there. And he's also one of the Democrats who's involved on this. But it is the first time they've debated this, and it keeps the issue alive. And it's a recognition, because the Democratic majority for Israel, AIPAC, et cetera, they wanted just the first resolution to pass and the party to stop talking about it. This is Martin trying to deal with the realities of the party that you were just talking about. Is it in a decisive way? It's not. His view of himself as party leader is that he needs to keep not unanimity, but unity. The party needs to stay together and hash this stuff out. That is an evolution. It's not the most exciting, bold evolution of what the party did, but it was a partial victory for the people who wanted that. And it's not getting treated, I've seen online, as a partial victory for anything. It's getting treated like the Democrats do, a classic Democratic thing. But that's not, if you're a AIPAC leader and you wanted to determine what the party was going to do today, it wouldn't have been that. It would have been just pass the resolution with some fairly toothless language and say, all right, issue settled. And that's not what happened.
I get that. I mean, it's very hard to make AIPAC completely happy. On the other hand, I wouldn't think they were enraged, right? Like there wasn't an actual position taken, certainly not one that would have opposed arms sales or U.S. support for Israel, either generally or with respect to Gaza. As you said, they kind of withdrew it and said, well, we'll throw it to a task force. Do you think this is one of those issues that we talked about earlier more broadly where the Democrats can see this political opportunity, which I think very much exists in both parties? I think there's going to be a very strong presidential primary candidate in 2028 for the Republicans saying we need to cut off all aid for real, stop financing foreign wars, including Israel, because there's so much of a sense of that now in all, as I said, in all demographic groups. And I think there's that space in the Democratic Party too as well. And even it's an opportunity for Democrats to gain some advantage over Republicans by being more out front on that. It seems to me, again, the problem is that the Democratic donor base, much of which is apathetic on Israel, but a large part of which is extremely passionate in being pro-Israel, they're stuck again between this political position they could take, that they may want to take, that their party members certainly support, and their necessity to placate these donors. Is that the conflict, or is it deeper than that?
The donors and also some voters. This is a faction of the party. The party gets a majority of the Jewish American vote. You pointed to the polling that younger Jewish voters, especially, are not reflexively, unquestionably pro-Israel anymore. But there are a lot of older Democrats who do threaten to leave the party if it is not fully supportive of Israel at this moment. And I'm not going to read all the talking points, but you know them. It's in a rough neighborhood. It absorbed the most devastating attack in its history, more devastating than 9/11, et cetera. That's not insincere. There are a lot of people in the Democratic coalition who want to support Israel in that way. The majority opinion at this point, I'd say, is a mixture of cut off all support, Israel shouldn't exist, and the position that you've seen those Democrats you mentioned, who some of them were endorsed by AIPAC in the past. It's basically, we can support Israel, but we can put conditions on this because, frankly, do they need this money? Do they need to continue this war? Are there military objectives that we support? No. Can we criticize them the way that we would criticize, frankly, other allies? There are other allies that get military aid from the United States and where we have a tougher hand on the reins. They're frankly in the 80s, and you know about this, there were times when Republican administrations took a tougher hand on Israel, when Israel was in many ways more vulnerable than it is right now. And so I'd say, add to this, the strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities that Trump approved, there was no political bounce for that in the polling. It's almost completely forgotten in this country. That's another example, I think, of how the mood in the country has moved to, why do we need to do this? Why does America need to fund all these conflicts? It feels like they might be able to figure it out on their own. That is not, it's hard to classify that as a anti-Semitic, anti-Israel position. That's a position that says, if we pull out, Israel's going to, it's not like South Vietnam in 1973. Israel's going to continue to prosper. Israel boasts about how good it is. Netanyahu's even written about, I think, the Munich effect, that when people think of Israel, they think, oh, the country that wins wars and hunts its enemies down to the end of the earth. Do they really need our money? That's becoming the majority position. And you characterize it, I think, well, yes, the defenders of the status quo, when they say anything less than full support is pro-Hamas, that's just very hard to sell outside of some rooms of donors.
I have a ton more questions for you about the Democratic Party, but just out of respect for your time, and you've given a lot, I'm just going to ask one or two narrow questions, if you don't mind, and then let you go. There was another vote that I think relates to AIPAC as well that I saw you're talking about a couple other people, which is there's this trend now where major super PACs, primarily AIPAC, but others as well, enter Democratic primaries. They did it with Cori Bush. They did it with Jamal Bowman. They spend, in both cases, AIPAC and the Israeli lobby spent something like $15 million to get George Latimer and Leslie Bellin in place of those two incumbents who were insufficiently supportive of Israel. And my understanding of this resolution would be, and maybe I'm wrong, but you tell me, that in some way it would limit the ability of super PACs to interfere in Democratic Party primaries. Is that really anything meaningful that they did, or was it just kind of a symbolic resolution?
It was somewhat symbolic. Now, it was something that Bernie delegates in 2016 wanted to have happen. They pushed for years when it was, I think, the fourth resolution today, when it passed. Jane Klebb, who was a pro-Bernie, she's the chair of the Democratic Party in Nebraska, said 10 years in the making. And she was cheering for this. What it says is that the DNC Committee on Reforms is going to study steps they can take to eliminate corporate and dark money in the primary in 2028, and it's going to endorse things that Democrats in Congress should do. And the trap there, not to get, you just forgive me, kind of a high sign, not to get the entire history of campaign finance law, but the trap and the problem is the Supreme Court is not about to rule against more money in politics. How can Democrats limit it in their own primary? And so they don't have an answer yet. It's a little symbolic, but the idea is they come up with something before 2028 that says, all right, you're a candidate, a super PAC is spending on your behalf. You're going to be punished in some capacity, in some delegate capacity. I don't want to make it up on the fly, but it's positioning the party to say, we are going to discourage dark money groups and PACs from intervening in our primaries. It's going to be the candidates. They raise the money. You can go to the FEC and see who donated them. We're going to try to figure that out in our party. And if we ever take power again, we're going to try to legislate that or get judges who do that. A long-term idea. It is something from the sincere Bernie campaign of 2016. He's asked for that his whole career. I don't know if he endorsed this today, but he's been endorsing this resolution. But that's what it is. And if you're cynical and say, how can they enforce that? Yeah, they really can't. But they can't enforce it because of the campaign finance system. What would happen if let's say it's 2028 and there's a super PAC that spends $100 million on Pete Buttigieg? How can they punish him? That's very TBD, but they're talking about it. And they want a little bit of credit for saying, we would like to roll this system back so that there's less big money influence in politics to the extent we can. There was one, it wasn't much of a debate. One DNC member said, we want to make clear we're not doing this in a general election. We don't want to defang ourselves if Elon Musk comes back and spends $250 million. But can our party at least be the party that doesn't want unlimited money in the primaries? It was, I've used the word sincere a couple times, but it came from Bernie people who've wanted this for a long time, and they are trying to fix that.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.